This is extremely, extremely important as we try to figure out what the Rasha is, and eventually, in the following page, what the Beinoni is, which this is our ultimate mandate. But before the Alter Rebbe begins the Beinoni, invests the 12, 13, 14, and pretty much throughout Tanya, but clearly in the next few chapters, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, and so on. The Alter Rebbe clarifies what the tzaddik is and what the Rasha is in order to know, for us to know what the Beinoni is. So, the tzaddik is, the tzaddik the Alter Rebbe concludes in Perek Yud. The entire chapter, Yud Aleph, deals with the Rasha. Now, who's this Rasha? And how many levels are there in the Rasha? So, on the surface, the Gemara says 2 levels. Rasha v'Tevlei, Rasha v'Ralei, similar to Tzadik v'Tevlei, Tzadik v'Ralei. But in the Rasha, in other words, when you want to say what is, the Alter Rebbe begins this 11th chapter, V'Zelu Mazel Salikim, that God created this. This corresponding to this, meaning that's what it means literally. Meaning to say, in our case, just like we find by the Tzadik, that there's the Tzadik v'Tevlei and Tzadik v'Ralei, so too by the Rasha, there's the Rasha v'Tevlei, Rasha v'Ralei. How many Rasha v'Tevlei are there? If you remember from last week, right? There is no, once we understand, just like by the Tzadik v'Ralei, we establish, once we understand what the Tzadik v'Ralei is, that itself tells us, and this understanding the Tzadik v'Ralei, it tells us there could be tens of thousands of Tzadik v'Ralei. Similarly, Zelu umazeh, when it comes to the Rasha v'Ralei, Rasha v'Tevlei, understanding what Rasha v'Tevlei is, that itself explains us that there could virtually be thousands of thousands and tens of thousands of levels of Rasha v'Ralei, Rasha v'Tevlei. What is a Rasha v'Tevlei? So let's go back to Tzadik v'Ralei. Now, how do we explain the Tzadik v'Ralei? Remember, just to note this point again, when the Gemara deals with Tzadik v'Tevlei and Rasha v'Ralei and all these different levels, the Gemara deals with their experience. There's a Rasha and he's experiencing good times in his life. Tzadik v'Ralei, a Tzadik which experiences negative times in his life. Despite he's a Tzadik, nonetheless, he's experiencing Ra. But again, based on this explanation, on Zayhar, that Tzadik v'Tevlei, Tzadik v'Ralei, or all the other 5 distinctions, it's not something which is in the experience of these individuals, but rather something which defines them. Again, that overall introduction. So just like we said about Tzadik v'Ralei, what means Tzadik v'Ralei? That on the overall he's a Tzadik. And nonetheless, the Ra, he has a little bit of Ra, and how much is this Ra? Is this Ra's loy? It's completely subordinate to this overwhelming tzaddikness. Similarly and conversely, when we're dealing with Rasha v'Tevlei, that on the overall he's a Rasha, but he has a little bit Teiv. But this Teiv is loy, is completely subordinate and surrender to the overwhelming presence of this individual as a Rasha. Now, when you're dealing with something which you say a little bit, and we gave this example time and again, we don't have to change the example because it's a good example. When you're saying you have a little bit of a powder, let's say we use the example coffee, if you have thousands of barrels, the difference is how much coffee you put in each. You could really divide it into tens of thousands. In other words, each barrel could look different than the other based on how many more drops or specks of coffee you're throwing in. Similarly, the person's overwhelmingly a Rasha. He has a little bit Taiv, but how much is this Taiv bent in to his overwhelming Rashaness? It could be somebody whose the Taiv is bent in a lot, and it could be the Taiv, someone the Taiv is bent in just a little bit. If you say it's bent in a lot, it means to say that Rasha really takes over even more. If you say it's bent in a little bit, that the Taiv stands out. So here, the Alter Rebbe gave an example of extreme right, and the next one we're going to learn today, the Alter Rebbe is going to give an example of extreme left. And I say right and left, which means something a lukewarm Rasha, which we sometimes, it doesn't say it over here, but sometimes we could find ourselves, interestingly, we could find ourselves in that description, or at least many of us could find ourselves in that description. We're not supposed to stay there, We're supposed to climb to be the Beinoni, which we'll find out what the Beinoni is. But we can understand that the Rasha, when we say Rasha, it doesn't mean that evil person who's doing bad, or even being Adam Lamokim between him and his Creator, that he's constantly sinning and he's constantly thinking things he's not supposed to think, and doing things he's not supposed to do, or speaking things he's not supposed to speak, and wasting his time, doesn't make mitzvahs, which we can perhaps imagine what a Rasha is. It's not at all. It could be somebody who does all the right things, and he's a Shemitah mitzvahs, and he's a Shemesh Shabbos, and he puts on tefillin, and he makes sure that every year she's a little of an estig, and does all the mitzvahs. Nonetheless, he could be clearly classified and distinguished as a Rasha v'Tevlei, because ultimately, what Hashem wants us not even to sin once. The moment we sin once, even though we cannot be called, or rather we're called a Rasha. It's based on the Gemara. The Gemara says someone sins even once is called a Rasha. Because what does it mean that majority of the time I'm okay, while in the majority of the time? Since when did the Eibush tell us the majority of the time you could be okay and the rest of the time you can't be okay? What about 95% of the time I'm good? What happened to that time? So once we understand as well, sin is not something this we established, and we spoke about this many times again. It'll be so much more elaborated in this 11th chapter when we're dealing with the Beinoni. It's not that the person doesn't have any signal, chas v'shalom, to do anything wrong, or to think anything inappropriate, to speak anything inappropriate. The signal might exist as long as I'm not a tzaddik. I didn't accomplish the v'yarta hara mikibech. I didn't eradicate the evil within my midst, which means within the deepest core of myself. May it be I eradicated it or I transformed it, as it's at two levels of tzaddikim. So it's vibrant, it's very much in existence. That doesn't mean and when it's in existence, doesn't mean that I become a Rasha because it's in existence. I become a Rasha when I give into it. It sends a signal. That's our heart, which sends a signal. Again, someone who's not the tzaddik, he can maybe even be the Beinoni. Okay, we don't know what exactly the Beinoni is as of yet, but to understand the fact that we're not a tzaddik, that shows that the Ra is still very much intact. So what is this Ra doing? It's sending a signal. Think that. Hashem says no, but it says think that anyways. Hashem says no, so there's a battle. So when I say no, so then I did not sin. The fact that I have a signal within my heart, or a pumping heart which is telling me, I mean to say not a physically pumping heart, I mean to say a heart which is pumping signals which are inappropriate signals, that doesn't make me a Rasha. That makes me a natural human being. When I'm a tzaddik, I'm very much not the regular natural human being. I'm a tzaddik, somebody I got rid of the core and essence of my heart is not telling me anything negative. There's no more negative signals coming from my heart. But as long as I'm not a tzaddik, there is a heart which is telling me, think that, speak that, despite it's inappropriate, but Hashem says not to, or do that. So it doesn't make me a sinning person when I have that heart. It just makes me a regular human being, just short of being a tzaddik. So I don't become a sinner. When do I become a sinner? That despite this heart is telling me a signal which is again contrary to Ratzon Hashem, and I have full authority over this signal because a person Hashem created every human being, not necessarily associated with the Jew or the religious Jew, human beings. The way they created human beings is moach shal lev, mind over heart. Mind over heart means to say that my mind could tell that heart, that signal, says, no, you're not coming in. You're not entering into my thought. You're not entering into my speech. You're not entering into my action. And it could be 5 minutes, not only 5 minutes later, 5 seconds later, the heart could send another signal that doesn't make me a Rasha, that makes me a regular human being, which is found in this world and did not, short of a tzaddik, right? Short of a tzaddik, because a tzaddik doesn't have any signals like that coming from his heart because of v'yarta hara mikibecha. He got rid of the evil. So I'm a regular human being with my heart is sending me signals and telling me, do these things which, even though they're contrary to Ratzon Hashem. Why are the heart sending me these signals? Because it's an animal. It's in the concept of the nefesh bahamis. And animals just want to do what is comfortable for them. And the same thing, my heart is telling me, do that because that's comfortable for you. You'll derive pleasure. And again, there is mentioned a few times, there's no stop sign between the permitted and the prohibited, because the animal just wants to do whatever is comfort, contributes to its comfort. So it sends these signals. So the fact that it sends these signals, that again doesn't make me a sinner, it doesn't make me a rasha. It makes me a person who's short of a tzaddik. When I accept it willingly, despite, right, only this millisecond decision, despite I know this moment, Hashem says, do not think that, and I accept it regardless, then I'm a rasha. No one compelled me to accept it. I deliberately, with my own decision, accepted that thought. And I'm even talking about thought, because when it comes to action and speech, for sure we see it so evidently. No one told me to do that. No one told me to speak that Lashon Hara. It could be it was a tempting moment to speak the Lashon Hara. It was juicy, people were sitting around, and it was a good opportunity to throw in a word which would catch everybody's attention. So there was a spark of excitement, there was a temptation, a lust to do that, but nobody pushed my teeth and my gums to say those words about this individual. It was my deliberate decision. When you make that deliberate decision, then you're called a rasha, because you formally transgressed Hashem's ratzon. And the same thing when it comes to action, even thought. Thought is so much more difficult to be completely in charge of, but again, the way that Hashem created man is we are completely 100% in charge of our thoughts. It could be we're going to have a signal which is going to tell us things, but the moment we chapsach, we catch them, we understand that this is something inappropriate, and we deviate our mind from this which is inappropriate. So we're not a rasha. Quite on the contrary, it's a mitzvah which we did, that despite we had a signal from our heart to think that, we said no, we're not allowing this to enter, or I should entertain my mind with something that Hashem says do not. So as long as it's there, it doesn't make me a rasha. It's when I accept it, that's what makes me a rasha. So here we're dealing with somebody who could be a frumei person, and he does all the mitzvahs, but he's at certain times throughout, as he explained, Al-Tareb explained over here, throughout the year, let's say, right? We didn't want to say last week, say a few times a day, but let's not even say throughout the year, there's a few times he sins. He could be a very beautiful Jew on the surface at least, but you cannot call him anything less than a rasha, or anything more than a rasha.
He's not even a Benoni?
How is he going to be a Benoni? If he sins once, he's not. How could he be a Benoni? It's like this kid said, Dad, Yom Kippur, right? This 8-year-old told his father, Dad, I fasted so many more times than you did, because you only fasted once. I fasted about 5 times, between breakfast and lunch and snack to this snack, and in the end of the day, all the way throughout the meal, I fasted 5 times. But it's obviously a pathetic statement, because fasting means you don't put nothing into your mouth a whole day. And if the adult wants to do the same thing and say, that sounds interesting, why should I fast once? I'll fast 3 times between this 3 snacks. I'll do 2 snacks. I'll take Yom Kippur. So I'm fasting 3 times between the beginning of the day to the first snack, in between, and then from the snack to the end of the day. But that's not called fasting. Fasting means you don't put nothing in your mouth the entire Yom Kippur or any other fast day, right? Similarly, no sinning. How can I be called a Benoni if I go ahead and I deliberately accepted this temptation, willingly accepted this temptation into my thought or speech or action? That's in the loisaseh and in the mitzaseh. When Hashem gave me opportunity, gave an example, learning Torah. We spoke last week why the Alter Rebbe picked up on learning Torah, because he's dealing with the Yid, which is completely on the right. They say completely on the right because in the overall he's a frumei Yid. But one of the mitzvahs the Yid has to complete is learning Torah. And learning Torah, there's no time you can say that I already learned. If there's another opportunity to learn Torah, one is obligated to learn Torah. So he has the obligation to learn Torah, and he again deliberately wastes his time. He deters his heart from that opportunity. In other words, does not utilize that opportunity. That's a clear transgression. So it could be I learned before, it could be I learned after, but I took a break. I did not, and it's not talking about taking a break. A person could rest if he needs to rest his concentration from his concentration and his intense study. So the resting itself is not bittul Torah, is when there was a good, exciting moment to learn, and I made a deliberate choice not to learn. That's a transgression, and mitzvah say. So I could shake the little Vanessa and I put on tefillin, I could do all the good things, but that was an opportunity, and I know that it was an opportunity to learn Torah, and I did not learn Torah. That's a transgression. So if I learned before, I learned after, so that someone's taking a break in the middle of Yom Kippur and saying, I'll do this, I'm fasting twice. But that's not called fasting. Similarly, you cannot be called a Benoni if you even periodically sin.
So we've got to learn what a Benoni really is.
Because a Benoni is somebody who doesn't sin at all. He's very far from the tzaddik. Remember, someone who never sins
That's why I want to see what
or
this
never will sin. The Lashon Al Tereba later in Beinin, you'll see Lo Over V'Lo Yaver. He'll never sin, he never will sin, and he's far from a tzaddik. Very far from a tzaddik. Why is he far from a tzaddik? The fact is that he has all these natural temptations which every human being has. How could you call him a tzaddik?
Unless he doesn't act on it, then he's called a tzaddik.
No, so if he doesn't act on it, how could he be called a tzaddik? Because what is he not acting on? Despite his heart is telling him, be
but he's a rush if he acts on it.
If
so
he
he
acts.
doesn't act on
So
it. What do you make him a tzaddik?
How could you make him a tzaddik? But what is he not acting
He
on?
has that in his heart.
If his heart is telling him to do all these terrible things,
he doesn't have any of those things in his
exactly.
heart.
The tzaddik doesn't even have that
So
heart signal which is telling him to do anything negative.
That's right.
But you just talked about that heart signal as being alive, as being part of humanity.
Right. But the tzaddik, does the tzaddik... So I'm asking you, does the tzaddik, his humanity has become very godly and refined,
Right.
which means he doesn't have any temptation when he walks the street and tells him
He's with
to be
God.
involved in his mind, thought, speech, and action, anything which is inappropriate. It's something very super, the tzaddik. That's what we mentioned quite a few times. Somebody who's so refined that he doesn't have any signal within his heart telling him, or rather the left side of his heart, where the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, the station is so or he eradicated it. When you say eradicated, it means like there's nothing telling him to do anything
What
wrong.
about the local there, like the lesser tzaddik, right?
Even the lesser tzaddik. So what is the difference of lesser tzaddik than the tzaddik gomer? The lesser tzaddik eradicated it. The tzaddik gomer transformed it. But in the end of the day, they're both certainly not on the surface.
The other
And how did
tzaddik
you
didn't even have it.
What?
The tzaddik Gamor.
No, the tzaddik gomer transformed it.
He had
transformed. Then he transformed it, right? But he transformed it, meaning that at this point of his life, there's nothing in his heart which is telling him do anything which is against Hashem. Not only do anything, any drive which he has is only towards godliness.
Okay, but let me ask you something else. And he's born like that tzaddik Gamor.
We went into this whole thing.
Right.
I'm not so sure. Like I said, yesterday's parsha, that Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Today's or Moshe yesterday.
Right.
Today's the Moshe Rabbeinu was born. It says he was born like a tzaddik. The whole house became like Yitayv. But I don't think that every tzaddik is born a tzaddik. It could be he went through all the stages. But we're talking about the tzaddik in his present state. There's nothing in his heart which is telling him chas v'shalom to do against Hashem.
Right.
So the difference of the tzaddik gomer, tzaddik sheni gomer, is the tzaddik gomer is, again, not to go into it, certainly not to elaborate, because we did certainly enough of, we did much of that, never enough, but much of that he transformed it, it became an ally, versus the tzaddik sheni gomer, he shunned it and he crushed it, the v'yarta, he also got rid of it. So when you say got rid of every evil, the tzaddik, even sheni gomer, walks in the street, he should have a temptation to do something wrong. If you have a temptation, there's a lot of evil within you.
Right.
What is the temptation? The temptation is clearly, overtly telling you to do contrary to Ratzon Hashem. How could you call that even close to a tzaddik? The Beinani, despite he has these temptations, he is still somebody who never sins. Again, remember, the definition of sin is not that you have that temptation. You cannot be called a tzaddik when you have that temptation, but it's not the definition of a sinner. Because a sinner means I accept, I gave into the temptation. The fact that I have a temptation is more that because that's the human side of me. Now the human side of the tzaddik is way, way greater and deeper, more profound than the regular human being. Because the human side of him is transformed, or he got rid of that natural humanness, so to say, too, which is inclined to be animalistic, or to do chas v'shalom contrary to Ratzon Hashem. That's not the life of the tzaddik. The Beinani, the reason why he's called a Beinani is because he never accepts that temptation. But a temptation he strongly has. And if someone tells you he doesn't have a temptation, he's probably the average person, he's probably outright lying to you. Or he's lying to himself. And one of the beautiful things Al Rebbe says later, this is revolutionary. I must say this is revolutionary because Al Rebbe, what he did, what he built so he allowed the person to go through the life and journey and this struggle, this odyssey of life in a very different manner. Take even that Al Rebbe, for example, later in the 27th chapter, Al Rebbe explains and picks up on a Gemara. Everything is based on Torah, Hanigla, in other words, the revealed Torah, the Gemara, the Talmud. Al Rebbe himself was extremely, not only a goyin on his own in the Nigla the Torah. He wrote the Shulchan Aruch, means this is the Al Rebbe, it's a Pesach in Nigla the Torah. He brings up the Gemara says someone who does not sin, he should be equally joyful and happy and content as if he's doing a mitzvah. Means to say that when somebody has an isayin, a test, right, and a test is something very natural. One walks in the street as a human being. There's certain things which Torah says, do not allow to give into your heart temptation. What is Torah dealing with? The Torah says, you Torah use a word like zayni machareim. The Torah says, who is this talking about? It's not talking about Rishoyim. It's talking about the Beinanim, people who never sin. But they have the temptation to sin. And the temptation to look something which Torah says do not. So first of all, I just want to make it clear parenthetically, it's like, doesn't mean somebody say, yes, no, yes, no. By the time they say no, they already appreciate it and it entered their mind, etc. And they clearly sinned, i.e. means they were a rasha. We're talking about someone who's a beinani. Make sure that, again, you're dealing on millisecond decision, does not accept this which he had the temptation, or let's say it's something to look or think or speak, or let's say think or look, and so on. Al Rebbe says you could start dancing. Just like you found the nicest esrig throughout the entire community, or a beautiful esrig, not nicest, but a beautiful esrig, and you were so excited that morning of the first day of Sukkot to make the brach on the lulav and esrig, beautiful lulav and esrig. You rejoice because you did a mitzvah. The moment you had a temptation to do something wrong and you hold yourself back, you could start dancing. You should ki'ilu asa mitzvah, the Gemara says, because you prevent yourself from doing an avera. That's revolutionary, because some people could fall and say, what is the real me? I go daven, I think I love God. I go out in the street, this is a different, love means to say I'm driven to other things. And you could fall. In other words, a person could not only fall, I mean, obviously we're talking about someone who's honest in his Avodas Hashem. Someone who his whole Avodas Hashem is based on honesty and integrity. That he knows exactly where he's up to. So it could be very confusing. Comes Al Rebbe and says, we'll talk about the notion of prayer soon, because Al Rebbe is really going to tell us later that the Beinani, at the time that he prays, he's very similar to the Tzaddik, and we'll find out how. But other times, you could be someone who never sinned in your life, and you never sin. In the same token, you could have a temptation like any bum on the street. That's the establishment of the Beinani. And that's being realistic, and that's allowing us to go through the journey of life with simcha, with joy, obviously with constraint and Kabbalah Sel, accepting the yoke of Hashem, but this is telling us really who we are. And people used to say, how did Al Rebbe ever know such a great tzaddik? What the Beinani, in the end of the day, Beinani is, in essence, he is like one of the, excuse my expression, a bum off the street, in the sense of who he is essentially. The difference is he never accepts any of these temptations. Now, the only thing is, when you exercise this constant awareness of the reality of God to the extent that you're careful 24/7 in every millisecond, obviously you're a better person. You'll never look like the bum off the street, because you're exercising complete 100% devotion to Hashem, meaning that you never allow, like you say, you fast the entire day, goes through 365 days of the year, you didn't sin once, not only in action, not only in speech, but not only even in thought. Obviously, you can't call this person a bum off the street, because he's a holy person, because he exercises, it's his avodah, he exercises enormous avodas Hashem. But who he is, the fact that he's not a tzaddik yet, means to say he has the regular temptations that every human being has when they are involved or live in this physical world. And that's very, as much as it's painful if you think about it, because the Beinani, who makes the Beinani to the tzaddik? In the end of the day, it's God. Because I could walk out in the street one day and say, I'm a tzaddik. I already got rid of the Beinani stuff. I'm already on the next level. You know what I am? Pretty much I'm a liar. The only way that could ever happen, because who told you that? You know very well that you still have to control yourself. The words I have to control myself, i.e. means I'm far from a tzaddik. Okay? So when could a person become a tzaddik? The answer is, God will make that decision, that He'll upgrade you from the world of the Beinani to the tzaddik, and He will help you transform the nefesh bahamis, that your taivis, your lusts and desires will be godly lusts and desires, nothing else. But till that happens, and Al Rebbe says later that don't feel bad. If the Eibishter did not upgrade you to the tzaddik, Hashem is sitting there and says, I want to derive pleasure from this person to be a Beinoni all his life. An expression Al Rebbe in the 27th chapter as well. Ulai likach nivra, maybe that's why he's created, that he should be a Beinoni all his life. It's painful, because the person could always say, do I have to have the same war I had yesterday, or sometimes even a more difficult war? And when am I going to get rid of this war in my dveikis, mean to say, in fulfilling my overall mandate and being close to Hashem even in this physical world, which that's why we came to this physical world, to demonstrate at dveikis to Hashem despite there is darkness, like Shlomo Melech says, Varisi, sheyesh chochma yisrein ha'er min ha'chochma yisrein ha'chochma min ha'sichus kisrein ha'er min ha'cheshach, mean to say to find the light via the darkness. Despite we live in a dark world, nonetheless, to find the light, and so to find the chokhmah associated with the truth and emes of Hashem via the darkness, via this dark experience, and the person could be very agonizing. And many times the Beinoni would naturally express his agony, which is many times the idea of prayer. What's the idea of prayer? A person sits in the room, he has a face-to-face talk. This is a board meeting you have, or a face-to-face talk with Hashem. Hashem, you put me down here, help me in my day. Like I have to quote different psukim of David HaMelech, which is again a line throughout the entire davening. There's a face-to-face talk. The person says, he expresses his yearning to Hashem that I really want to be close to you and be part of you. But in the same token, he could take off his tefillin, and for the next 20 hours, he could be somebody. He will have to experience the same Beinoni experience.
And I think age helps with all that thing that we experience.
You become more,
yeah, I think so.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Yeah.
No, I
but
do.
Also we're shaped by our actions too, and that's why not to exclude Hashem from the equation here. But I could see that if someone is practicing assiduously for decades as a Beinoni, he's not involved in sin and he's doing all the mitzvahs. Just that action, that physical, getting used to doing what is correct, is going to transform.
But is it going to become the tzaddik? When you say transform, let's use the terms as we know it.
It will diminish the taiva to do anything that isn't.
And what if it doesn't?
And I think age and life experience takes away, gives us more control.
Life is good habits.
Okay, so what?
It's good habits. It's a question.
It's good habits, but
it's developing good habits. That's the way I think. Certain things that I before now, I don't have the same temptation or the running over, or I realize what's more important.
Okay,
in life.
maybe you are becoming the tzaddik.
No, I don't think I'm becoming the tzaddik, but I think just through age, I see.
You know what? In the same token, expression of the Alter Rebbe, sometimes as we pursue in Olam Haba, in this physical world, it works to the contrary as well, because ultimately there are certain things which, as much as we exercise to be the Beinoni, but the fact that we live in this world and we have our 2 feet on the ground in this world, involved in all worldly matters as human beings, that itself intensifies the nefesh bahamis as well. We had a good breakfast, so there's something that we fed into the animal soul, not necessarily in a sinful manner because we're supposed to be, let's say we're the Beinoni, or this is the Beinoni, but the fact is that he had a good breakfast. That itself is something which fed into the nefesh bahamis. So if I have, you say, with age, till then I had 1,000 breakfasts. But if a person lives more years, he had many more 1,000 breakfasts. So each one of them was a feeding into nefesh bahamis. And it's expression of Alter Rebbe, not my interpretation. And if it's breakfast, it's lunch, it's supper, it's any involvement in worldly matter. For that matter, we feel it sometimes ourselves. A person, that's why you're not supposed to eat before davening, because once a person eats, there's a certain plunge, at least everyone to its own. If we're only honest on this, after a good meal, we have a little more struggle in our Avodas Hashem, especially when it comes to things which are dealing with things which are more refined, like thoughts, to keep a pure thought and to keep focus. When a person is removed a little bit, it's easier to overcome because his nefesh bahamis is in a state of surrender. He didn't have that lavish breakfast, because when you have that lavish breakfast, in a sense, you're expanding on the Nefesh Bahamis.
Or you're thinking about your breakfast while you're davening, which also isn't good. It's
going to be the breakfast that I needed.
Okay.
So we have some. What is Shlomo HaMelech saying? Kahelis, don't we get more even keel as we age?
I don't know. I don't know.
Don't you come into that realization?
I think. I mean, there's words Al Rebbe later. He says the fact that the more we live, and we should all live for a very long time. In a sense, we're not talking about an older person who's not intact, like the Rambam says. A person should always do tshuva when the temptation, when he sinned, is completely intact. That's true. There's a concept of age. But there's age, you're talking about age and age. When someone's 80, 90, 100 is different than you're saying he's from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50. Because the fact is, it's 30 years, inevitably, the fact every day he lives in Olam Hazeh, he's eating a good lunch and a good supper and a good breakfast and every other involvement in the worldly matters, not even in a sinful way, but the idea that we're involved, that expands on our Nefesh Bahamis. So what is the tzaddik? How does that tzaddik eat? No question, the tzaddik eats a bit different. The famous Hillel HaZaken Al Rebbe said, just to hope these puzzles coming into the puzzles coming into place. Look at Hillel HaZaken said when he went to eat, he told his Talmidim. Al Rebbe brings it later in Tanya. He told his Talmidim, "I'm going to do kindness with this impoverished, this poor entity." He was talking about his body as a third party. I don't think like that when I'm going to eat. I'm going to eat for myself. He was talking about his body, the third party. I have to go do kindness with this aluva, with this shameful or this impoverished entity, because his whole eating is different. That's the life of a tzaddik. Now, we cannot understand it, but because at least most of us are not there. I never pinpoint and say someone is not a tzaddik, but the Beinani, in the end of the day, the fact is that he still has, in his core essence, he has that complete, the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul is so intact. So whenever he's engaged in worldly matters, may it be 100% according to halacha, in the end of the day, it's feeding into his Nefesh Bahamis. Not negating the other way around, which you were saying. First of all, if you're talking about age, there's no question, 80, 90, 100, and so on, but there is something special when somebody exercises being a Beinani. And again, Beinani, he's fasting a whole entire day without any breaks, in the example which we gave. Never allows, never, ever, ever allows, we're dealing with thought, right? Things which are more sensitive, which really, that's really the catch, or things which are, we see, are more of our control, or a demonstration of our surrender to Ratzon Hashem is more machshava. And someone who does that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, there's no question that his kedusha is very obvious. He's a holy person. He's utilizing every moment to learn, to daven, and so on. And he never transgressed, never took a break. And I use the same, he fasts throughout. That's a ish kaddish. But from that to a tzaddik, there's millions. There's such a great gap. For that matter, there's a certain similarity, if you think about it, of the Rasha to the Beinani, so much more than the Beinani to the tzaddik.
You used a term before, and I just want to make sure that I got them clear. You mentioned lukewarm Rasha.
Yes.
And then it seemed as though you were using that synonymously with the Rasha V'Tovlo. Are they the same or are they different?
Yes, but the Rasha V'Tovlo itself, there's thousands of Rasha V'Tovlos, a lukewarm within Rasha V'Tovlo itself.
So this is a category within Rasha V'Tovlo.
Exactly. This that Al Rebbe tells us. So Al Rebbe said three things. And we must finish Yud Aleph. I'm going to start Yud Beinani regardless. So we should finish Yud Aleph. I'm going to say this very briefly. You're tired also, because and especially you were here last week. Three things Al Rebbe says to see the idea of a lukewarm, which you see that the Al Rebbe gives an example to the right, a very pragmatic approach to the Rasha V'Tovlo. When he gives in to his temptation, he will try and make sure that it's not a deraisa, not a Torah prohibition. In the end of the day, even a non-Torah prohibition could classify someone of a Rasha or a Beinani. But he's a Rasha V'Tovlo, a lukewarm, means to the right, that even he decides to give in to his temptation. And again, it's a decision. Nobody tells us to give in. It wasn't I was just there and no. We have complete control, mind over heart. But when he makes a decision to give in, it's not a Torah prohibition. Number one. Number two, the Alter Rebbe says he doesn't do it frequently, infrequently, sinning once a month, let's say, let's give an example, but that cannot be called a Beinoni anymore. That's like, again, he fasts twice in a day in Kippur. That's not fasting, period. And then another example that Rebbe gives, that even if he decides to give in, he will not give in an Avera which involves his thought, his speech, and action unanimously. He will transgress thoughts. Now, to give an example, what is thought? Or speech. And again, it's not a deraisa, avak lashon hara, not something he will sit and say chas v'shalom, this person, this, the dust of lashon hara, like you mentioned, roll his eyes, or say I don't want to talk about that person. The way halacha classifies it, because he's a yirei shamayim, he's a God-fearing Jew, but he gave into the temptation on something which is drabanan. Right. And when it comes to maisa, also an action which is not a deraisa, that's in loisasa. And Mitzvah Say, interestingly, gives the mashal of Limud Torah, as we explained multiple times. And at the end of the day, the most difficult mitzvah to keep fully is the mitzvah of Limud Torah. And therefore, a Beinoni keeps that mitzvah in the most complete manner. Because remember, if the Beinoni does not keep even the most difficult mitzvah, which is Limud Torah, in a complete manner, he's no more a Beinoni, he's a Rasha. Okay? Means to say, let's use a conceptual example. He learned 24 hours of the day minus a minute, 23.59 minutes, and that minute was a very opportune time to learn, and he did not learn Torah. He is not a Beinoni anymore. He's a Rasha because he gave in to something it was opportune to learn. Okay? How we translate to technical person has to sleep within 24 hours, but we're talking about this ideal, conceptually, he cannot be called a Beinoni anymore, but Al-Tereva, when he's speaking about the Rosh Hashanah, this lukewarm to this right, he uses the mitzvah of Limud Torah. Now, so here, you wanted any of these, you still called a Rosh at that time, even it's the lukewarm, again, we used to lukewarm, even if it's the Rosh of a table, the way, the most extreme to the right Rosh of a table, but at that moment he's called a Rosh. Why? Because what is transpiring over here? Because the evil within his soul is intensifying and is investing in his body, and is making him sin, and the mitama is in purifying him. Okay? And that's why he's ultimately sitting. Because he's accepting the decision of the Rasha Benafshe, the evil within his existence. But still, because he's a Rasha V'Tevele, this far right extreme, therefore what's going to happen probably immediately after Rahman he fell, he succumbed with his deliberate decision to sin. The Nefesh Halikis is going to strengthen itself, and he is going to mischaret, and he's going to regret, because he knows he disconnected himself from Hashem, even at the Rabbanan, and even something which came only in an infrequent basis. And even something which he impurified only one of his garments, his made speech, or his thought, or his speech, or his action, not all three together. So he feels what probably is going to happen by this person, his taiv, the good, which is the nefesh halikis, which is still there, and not only there, it's potently there if you think about it, because he's a person which most of the time doesn't sin. And mischaret, that is going to probably cause him to regret. And he asks forgiveness from Hashem. And Hashem certainly, which is and looking into the struggles and battles of the Yid, and Yislach Lei, Hashem will forgive this person. Naturally, not just a hop, skip, and jump. In other words, yes, sinning, not sinning, sorry, before we say sorry, we're already doing the next thing. No. Im shav b'tshuva ru'uya, if he does tshuva with appropriate tshuva, based on the suggestions of our wise, blessed may their their memory to be for blessing. In other words, this is an expression Chazal, which is Chachamein and Zechrein Levacha, based on their suggestion. Rabbi Shimon was one of the Chazal Chachamim, which told us about the three famous steps in tshuva corresponding to different sins. Again, you could look it up in the Gemara, you could look it up also in the Geras HaTshuva, the first chapter in the Geras HaTshuva, which is the third compartment of the Tanya. Al-Tereba elaborates on these three levels of tshuva corresponding to different sins. It's actually not three, it's a shleisha, but there's eventually a mitzvah, mitzvah leises, kares, mitzvah b'deshamayim, and so on and so forth. But if he does tshuva appropriately, like it's explained elsewhere, Hashem will forgive him. Hashem will forgive him. And interesting, Al Tereba telling us over here telling this individual which is in a struggle, which is still a Rasha V'Tevlei, because his Teiv is still there, and therefore mischaret, he tells him that Hashem will forgive you if you do the appropriate tshuva. Okay? So this is the Rasha V'Tevlei to the right. And the Yesh, here we go to the left, the Yesh Misharak Gever B'Yeser. Here, we're dealing up to that again. There's tens of thousands of different levels. You know, are you missing a copy? There's a copy right over here that you're looking at these small words. Oh, you have everything? Yeah. You have enough? Yeah. So the terms of Yesh, here we go. There's something to the other side. Remember, there's tens of thousands of different levels, but the Rebbe is not going to go over here through all the tens of thousands of levels. He's just showing us that you can find to the other extreme. At the Ragev B'Yeser, the evil is strengthened itself even more. You see over here, conversely to what Al Rebbe gave the example of the Rasha V'Tevlei to the right, something to the extreme left or to the very far left, and conversely to all these different details Al Rebbe gave. One of the things Al Rebbe says that the Rasha V'Tevlei, the one we mentioned before, will not impurify with a sin himself with a sin with all three garments are involved, thought, speech, and action. This is an individual, that he will invest all his three garments. Remember, in the fourth chapter, thought, speech, and action are called the garments, which this is the crucial point where a person is the non-sinner, chas v'shalom, to be the sinner, so he invests all three levushim, thought, speech, and action. As well, the evil within him is so potent that it'll bring the person to sin more severe avedas, classically known as deiraisis as an example, and also beitim krevis yeser. It's so potent that he will not leave any space and distance between one sin and the other. It'll be more frequent. But remember, he's still called the Rasha V'Tevlei, and therefore bein time mischaret. He still has this charata. He still has the regret. The borim le'ir hurei tshuva and certain thoughts of tshuva come because
we're using the same name.
So it's the Rasha
still Rasha V'Tevlei. They're both Rasha V'Tevlei.
He uses the three garments.
All the three garments. That's right.
Why don't we give him another name?
What? Why should we give him another name?
Because there's so many levels. No, there's two different levels. He gave the one that only used the garment at a time. This time he gives you the Rasha V'Tevlei.
And they're both Rasha V'Tevlei. But it's the other extreme. We said what?
He knows less good.
That's right.
Right, and also the Rebbe said there's tens of thousands of levels. So, as an example, here you could have somebody, for example, you could say, how infrequent? Every 2 minutes, every 2 hours. You can see the tens of the thousands. Means once you see these two levels, you could understand where the tens of thousands of levels come in.
These are very,
Because just from the example itself, the Rebbe is obviously not going to go through the tens of thousands, but just to understand, you have. Just he uses comes back with it. He said the three examples, which makes him a Rasha V'Tevlei again to the right. He shows you again, which is a more stronger Rasha V'Tevlei, but more the Rasha is more dominant. That he allows all three levushim and averes chamuris and bitim krevis yeser means more frequent. But so what makes him a Tevlei? Because he still has the Tev is still there. Where do we see the Tev that he regrets? Because if the Tev was completely dipped in to the whole Ra experience, where would he regret?
So that would be a Rasha V'Rala.
Oh, that's the Rasha V'Rala. That doesn't even regret. Right? But here we're still talking about the Rasha V'Tevlei. It's a very not pretty picture of this Rasha V'Tevlei, because it's somebody who frequently sins, and he's indifferent in the type of sins and how frequently he sins and how much he's investing all three of his three garments.
But his regret is going to decrease with his actions.
You know what?
Oh, will it?
Possible.
Well, because
the more he does it, he'll harden himself, and
he's feeding into the Ra. Could be. It could be.
Guilt could make him feel the other way. No, but could make you feel bad, and I won't do it anymore.
About the Avera, the first time you do it, you feel guilty.
You're right.
No,
it could be.
You think it's a mitzvah.
It could be, but in the same token, there is the fact that there is some hirhuri tshuva, which mean different thoughts of tshuva, at least comes into his mind, means to say that the Tov is not completely dipped under.
The habitual sinner.
No, because
the habitual sinner. That's fine.
He has Pinas Tev Shebenafshe. Shemiskabik Tas being time. You see it strengthens itself being time between the little moments when he doesn't sin. He still has Charata, which means you see that the Tov is still there. If it wouldn't be, that means that Taiv would be completely dipped under, submerged to the Overad, and he's a Rosh Hashanah already. But here he's still a Rosh Hashanah because Miktzab has been time. It doesn't have the strength to be victorious over the evil. To completely yank himself away from sin, to truly confess and leave this sin behind. No. And this is what the Gemara says again. The Gemara says that they're full of regret. Why are they full of regret if he's a Rasha? Because the only way you can be full of regret is because you sin so frequently. Right? They say Rishayim Malaim Charatis. It seems like a virtual statement on the Rasha, but it goes together with the fact that you're regretting so much because you're sinning so much. Right? Shem Reva Rishayim, this majority of the Shem Shesh Bam Chum Teiv V'Nafshim Adayim, they have a bit of evil within themselves. And here the Alter Rebbe cross look at Alter Rebbe just says a few words about the Rosh Hashanah because hopefully nobody should be ever Rosh Hashanah. See, Alter Rebbe doesn't elaborate. He says Mishayin Mischayat. Right away we're crossing into Rosh Hashanah. Mishayin Mischayat Leilam. Someone does not have regret at all. No thoughts of repentance ever go through his mind. He's called a Rosh Hashanah. Why? Based on what he explained, what the Ra, again, the Ra, Taiv means to say that the Taiv is like to the Ra, but here there is no Taiv on the surface. Sharasha benafshe, the evil within his nefesh, within his soul, who levadin ishbikibre, is the only remaining dominating force. Tigover kol kachala Taiv, it strengthened itself so much on the good, achini stalik mikirbe, that the little good completely left him from his midst, left his midst. Left him completely. And the Aimed b'mchinas makav v'mayla. Here the Alter Rebbe says, because remember the Alter Rebbe was the one who told us in the very beginning, the second chapter, that every yid has a chelik l'kamim al mamash. Every yid has a part of Hashem within him. So how could it be? So what the Alter Rebbe is really telling us, and see the word over here, it doesn't say nistalik got rid of him completely, because then you can cut off so many parts of Am Yisrael, and there's no such a thing that we should ever classify any yid and say he has no connection at all. That's why the Alter Rebbe uses lashon nistalik mikirbay, from within him, from his conscious behavior. That's where it left, but it always remains makif alav milmayla. It remains hovering over him. And where do we see it? The Razal tells us akol be'asar shchinta sharya, that whenever there's 10 people, the divine presence rests. And if you look in the Reminder of this Gemara, which says Akol be'asar shchita sharya, does the Gemara say whenever there's 10 tzaddikim, the Shekhinah is going to rest? No. It doesn't even say when there's 10 Beinanim, the Shekhinah is going to rest. And it doesn't even say 10 Rishayim v'Toivloi, the Shekhinah is going to rest. It says Akol. Akol is an all-inclusive statement saying whenever there's 10 people, even part of the 10 are Rishayim v'Ralai, they complete the picture of 10, which brings that extra dosage of the Shekhinah, or brings the Shekhinah to come down in a way of Sharia. And we find it by a minyan. When you have 10 people to daven, it could be somebody who is a Rosh Hashanah eventually, because he's in the room. At that moment he decides to answer. I don't know exactly how it goes together, but Rosh Hashanah, he wants to answer Baruch Hu Shmei Amen, and he still wants to be part of a minyan. But let's put him into that minyan picture. You can go ahead and say Kedusha and Kaddish and Baruch Hu and all these things, because the Torah says, the Gemara says Akol. And if you think about it, if you want to dissect this person, what the Alter Rebbe explains of this person, Nistalik, that the Neshama, godly soul, left him. So why is he part of the minyan? The whole reason why a yid is part of a minyan as opposed to someone who's a non-yid is because he has a neshama. But if you say nistalik, how could he be part of the minyan? The answer is, what does the Alter Rebbe says? The Alter Rebbe says, nistalik mikirbay, from within him, which means as it functions consciously, he's conscious and cognizant about it, or he lives to some degree, even as a Rosh Hashanah, with that neshama. But if he doesn't, it's nistalik mikirbay, but makif olav, it is, and therefore he could be part of a minyan. And for that matter, interesting, with this we'll conclude, if you know the minyan is called it tzibur. Tzibur is an acronym of tzaddikim, beinanim, urashayim.
Oh, cool.
So the Rasha, in the end of the day, is also part of that asara. So even you're dealing with even we're dealing with a Rasha of a type, like you don't find any good in this person's in this person. So first of all, we should never label another Yid. We should always try to work on ourselves. But let's say there exists. We should know that never to give up on him. And the fact is that he has a neshama. The problem is the neshama is more makif, is more hovering. It's more something which is on the surface. It doesn't enter b'pnimius because he threw it out. But in the same token, makif it is, and akol be'asar shchinta shaya, whenever there's 10, and akol means including everybody. Have a great night.